And I think we're all looking for things that we can trust and rely on. So, just the whole concepts of honesty and integrity, for me, and I think for a lot of our customers, that's a huge piece of why people come in and do business with us. And I think that can play out for any business. I just think those are hallmarks in life that sometimes get pushed to the side and shouldn't be. And so I think that they have, served us well for 100 years. So.
Okay, well, we'll get started. Good morning. We are at First National Bank in Louisburg, which amidst all the crazy and uncertain things of 2020, a bright spot is that they're celebrating their 100th anniversary, which when you consider Kansas hadn't been around 200 years, that's a big percentage of the time that folks have lived here, particularly probably in this town and this area. And so Bob Nauman, the president and the longtime friend, and just going to ask Bob to tell us a little bit about the history of the bank and some of those lessons that we can learn from how you build relationships that last 100 years, particularly when you think about an industry like banking, where there's been so much change and maybe just some of the resilience that's built into the business model that lets you adapt to all that change. So I will unmute you.
So I have sat in on a number of these, but I've never presented a Zoom call. So, but I'm really grateful to Randy to have invited me to do this. As he commented, our bank has celebrated its 100th anniversary. That happened on July 30th of this year. And we had done a lot of preparations ahead of 2020 to be prepared for our celebration. And then, of course, the coronavirus hit and changed things pretty dramatically for us and for everybody else. So we had a lot of things planned and really have not had an opportunity to kind of tell our story. And it's really a pretty compelling one, I think. And so I'm grateful to have the chance to kind of talk about that. I thought it might help to just give you a quick overview of who I am, kind of my personal facts and figures, and then we can talk about the bank's history, which is really what I want to visit about. And then I think kind of what has made our bank tick over the last 100 years. And I've been a part of that for a while, but certainly not for 100. So I'm married. My wife, Paula, and I have been together for 45 years. We have 3 sons, Eric, Kurt, and Kyle. And they have blessed us with 3 wonderful daughter-in-laws and now 5 granddaughters and a grandson and a granddaughter on the way. So family is a really important part for our existence, and we're enjoying our family a lot. Both of us went to Ottawa University, just 30 miles west of Louisburg, met there. Paul was an education graduate, and I majored in psychology and minored in business. And as far as hobbies and interests, we very much enjoy traveling and bicycle riding. We do that a lot in Kansas City, kind of involved with fitness and hunting and snow skiing. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview from that standpoint. I started my banking career at Kansas State Bank in Ottawa, Kansas in 1982 and came to Louisburg in 1985. So those of you that are pretty quick at math, I've been here for 35 years, and that's as of the 15th of October. So I became president in 2005. And I'll be turning 66 in November. And so I've really spent more than half of my life in this institution. So I have a lot vested here, both personally and family and otherwise. So just to kind of give you an overview of the bank. So the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is an extension of the U.S. Treasury. And through that, the National Banking Department was really born out of that. And so in July of 1920, our bank was given charter number 11798, and our bank has held that same number for 100 years. It's never changed. Our ownership has changed through the years, but not a lot. But as far as the legal entity, the bank has been First National Bank of Louisburg, Kansas, charter number 11798. Our first day of business, however, wasn't until 11 days later on August 10th of 1920. We now have 3 locations. Our main bank is here in Louisburg. We have a facility in Stillwell that was built in 1993. And then our last establishment was put in 2013 in Prairie Village, so kind of in the heart of the KC metro area. So I'll confess, my comments going forward, I'm sure are going to be a little bit biased because of the time that I've spent here, but I think our story is pretty compelling. And so I really hope that you'll listen to kind of the facts and the figures more than my color commentary as I kind of go through this. So, Randy asked me to talk and, what makes a business last for 100 years? And there's so many things. I mean, I don't know if there's one thing, and there's probably a million things, but a small town bank in the middle of America, how does it get started and how does it prosper? So there are really 2 important things that kind of starts this story out. And if we have any historians on the call, you'll maybe jump to these pretty quickly, but there were 2 really important events that happened right before July of 1920. And I could ask if anybody knows those, but I'll just run to it. So the first is World War I. Our generation, looking around, seeing who's on this call, none of us were certainly alive at that time. And, we're probably more Vietnam era and maybe World War II, but nothing prior to that. So World War I started in 1914. The U.S. got involved in 1917, and then the war ended in November of 18, which was 20 months ahead of when the bank opened its doors. Sadly, 75 million people died in that event, 20 million military personnel and 40 million civilians. So it had a huge impact worldwide. Along with that, which is part of what the story is, for me, kind of compelling, with kind of bookend events, is that some of you may remember that the world experienced probably the worst pandemic of all time with the Spanish flu. And that began in January of 1918 and ended in December of 1920, which is 5 months after the bank opened. So we had this confluence of the war ending and the Spanish flu impacting the world, and certainly, even places like little old Louisburg, Kansas. 50 million people, just to kind of put things in perspective with what we're dealing with today, just kind of a side note here is, 50 million people worldwide died as a result of the Spanish flu, and purportedly about 675,000 U.S. citizens died as a result of the flu. So it had a huge impact. And I'm going to break away just to, again, I'm kind of a history buff. If any of you have ever had a chance to visit the World War I Museum, you know what I'm talking about. If you've not, you really should go, because there's a history wall or a chronology wall that's there. And it actually talks about the Spanish flu and how it impacted the war. And a number of historians claim that the Spanish flu started at Camp Funston, which is at Fort Riley, just outside of Junction City, Kansas. That's 156 miles from Louisburg, Kansas. My grandfather, Clarence G. Nauman, actually was a private, grew up in Ottawa, and went to Camp Funston to train, shipped out from there in June of 1918, fought in several battles, was there, of course, at the conclusion of the war, and then came back in February of 1919. But if you go to the World War I Museum, you'll see historical references to the Spanish flu And there is a lot of evidence to suggest that that started at Camp Funston at Fort Riley, Kansas, just out of Junction City, Kansas. So, kind of an interesting connection there, I think. So Louisburg was incorporated in 1882. And Louisburg in 1920 was just a typical Midwestern farm belt town driven by agriculture. And that still is somewhat true today. Agriculture is not nearly as big as today as it was then, just because of our proximity to the metropolitan area, but still has an influence. And financial capital, as you all know, if you're tied to business, is really kind of the root of growth for business and growth for any city. So Louisburg was no exception with that. And I think what happened is that there were a number of people that, saw the need for that. Kansas City was 30 miles north and was really kind of the driving force for commerce for Louisburg. And that would have been true for any small town, I think, throughout the United States. Everyone was kind of driven off the metropolitan areas that they were close to. And so that was true for Louisburg. So 35 citizens pooled $25,000 just ahead of July of 20 and capitalized the bank and became the bank's first shareholders. So just remember that figure of $25,000. Out of that group of citizens and shareholders, 9 directors came out of that. And for those of you that may be tuning in from the Louisburg area, names like Rogers, Clark and Bert Rogers were brothers, big farmers in our area. And there's a road here in town called Rogers Road, and that comes from those guys. Charles Pabst, that last name would ring a bell, I think, for a few people. And Wayne Starry is another name that still has some local pull. So after 29 days of being in business, the bank had grown to $70,000 in deposits and over $101,000 in total assets. So the growth came pretty quickly, which was kind of indicative, I think, of what the demand was probably at that time for help from a banking standpoint. So, the impact of the war, the impact of the Spanish flu, the need for commerce really drove all of this. But unfortunately, as we all know, again, if you studied history, that growth came pretty quickly. And so in 9 years time, the economy around the country was booming, but it was a little bit on a false pretense. There was a lot that was driven by just anxiousness to get things going and not a lot of strength and stability underneath that. And so in 1930, of course, the Great Depression hit and the stock market hit and had a tremendous impact on our country. And actually over 9,000 banks closed as a result of the Great Depression. Prior to that, in 1929, because again of the stimulus of wanting to kind of get our country going after the war, there were 35,000 banks in existence, which is actually an all-time high for our country. So you would think maybe that would have been later in the country's history, but it was actually right before the Great Depression. And in fact, as a result of the Great Depression, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was developed. You all would probably know that more by FDIC, the initials, but that's the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And that was developed and put into play by the federal government because of the huge amount of distrust on the part of the public because of what happened with the Depression and the closing of all these banks and the money that was lost. So in 1933, believe it or not, there were 28 states that did not have a bank. That was not true for the state of Kansas. Our bank was here and actually a number of other banks. But if you look around our country, 28 states did not have a bank. which had a huge impact on our country to move forward because again, it takes capital, as we all know, it takes money to make things move and happen. So the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, 4 decades that impacted the banking industry quite as much as the Depression did, but we had World War II, we had the Korean War, we had the Vietnam War, and they all, of course, had expected economic results and turbulence with that, but not, again, to the same extent that the Depression did. The 1980s and 90s and 2000s, and again, kind of looking at the group that's kind of listening in today, I think we were all around during those times. So you know that, we really had 3 recessions during those 3 decades, and those absolutely had an impact on banking. Something else occurred that has kind of gotten lost over time, and that is the whole concept of interstate banking and intrastate banking. So prior to the 1980s, if you go back to the 70s, if you were a bank, you could only be located in your town. You couldn't branch anywhere. You just had your bank in your town. And if there was an adjoining town that didn't have a bank, then they were coming to your town to do banking. So the federal government, the banking associations, whatnot, everyone began to realize that that was restricting growth in our country. So the doors got opened up. And so the first branching that occurred, those rules only allowed you to go to another adjoining town. You couldn't go 2 towns away, but you could go 1 town away. That lasted for a few years. And then it got to the point where you could branch beyond your state, but you can only go to an adjoining state. You couldn't go 2 states across. Well, what happened as a result of that is the money center banks, and I would say the big box stores banks, let's put it that way, but the ones that you all would recognize and can think of pretty readily. Most of those, grew out of the east part of our country, because that's really where our country began. So the money center banks saw an opportunity with that and started putting branches all across the country, and also putting them, buying banks, smaller banks, and merging them into their own. So that really kind of started the attrition or consolidation in our industry, which has continued up until today. Another thing that impacted banking dramatically during that course of time was the level of regulation. And for good reason in most cases. I can sit here and joke around with some of my staff, and we could, I'm sure, find a number of things that we don't particularly think are valuable or useful and just complicate our lives. But for the most part, the regulation that we're to adhere to is very beneficial to the public. But I would say outside of the nuclear related business, in business. And so as a result of that, to be a small bank and to be able to find talent and experienced talent in banking is a tough find. And so for us, we've done, I think, a pretty good job at being able to harness that. But in addition to that, we've also had to rely heavily on outside vendors, particularly in the areas of IT and accounting, compliance, all of those areas. We really rely on other resources to get our work done. So that kind of brings us up to the kind of present day, but I would just comment over, if you go back from 1985 to 2013, that time frame, so the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s, 68% of all community banks either failed or were merged during that time frame. So it was a dramatic change in the landscape for banking. And for those of you that are in Kansas, if you go back to the year 2000, the state had over 400 banks, and today there's 275 banks. So again, a very, very big change. In 1985, banks held 37% of all deposits around the country. Today, that's just 12%. And so much of the money within the country has moved again to the big money center banks. So, again, how did First National Bank survive all of that? So the bank was bought by its present ownership in 1979. So our current ownership has had it for 48 years. And I think, the philosophy and the approach has been really much the same. And I guess I would sum it up by saying, we're more trying to be the tortoise as opposed to being the hare. Our growth goals have always been very moderate, and we want them to be sustainable. We're not trying to be the first or the fastest. And another key component in all of this would relate to sell it. We've had a lot of opportunities to sell the bank because of the quality that we have here, but our ownership has not had an interest in doing that. So obviously, if you sell your bank, then you give up your charter and you no longer have the ability to be 100 years old. So that's been a part of it too. So where are we today in banking, and where's our bank today? I mentioned back in 1929, there were 35,000 banks. Today, there are less than 5,000 banks and savings and loans in existence in our country. Out of that less than 5,000, only 831 are nationally chartered banks. And the remainder are all state-owned or savings and loan institutions. 310 of the 831 are actually 100 years old. And so I think what that kind of tells me is that the ones that have stayed and stayed intact have been in existence for a good period of time. If the office of the comptroller of the currency divides our country into districts or districts or areas. So if you take the Mississippi River and go west, there are only 117 nationally chartered banks in that half of the United States, which is a lot of people would not have guessed that, but kind of an interesting statistic. And there are 40 in that 117 that are 100 years old. So our bank in July became the 41st bank in that Western district to become 100 years old. So, again, how has our bank survived and really not just survived, but it has prospered. And this year has been an extraordinary year for us, and I'm sure an extraordinary year for all of you, and very unusual. Our total assets now are at $162 million. We started out with 25,000. And we're up 29% for the year in year 2020, which for us is unprecedented. We've never had growth like that. Our loans are up 18%. Our deposits are up 32%. And I'll also just quickly, a lot of you may have been involved with the payroll protection program that the federal government and SBA put forth this year. That has certainly stimulated a lot in the banking industry. We did 150 PPP loans and did that out of all three of our locations. Those loans were actually made to non-customers, and about 30 of those loans were made to minority-owned businesses. And a lot of banks decided that they were going to make loans only to their customers. We chose not to do that because we realized what the government was trying to do, which was really try to extend itself to small business in any way that it could. And so we just felt like we were an extension of that and wanted to help participate in that. So we met a lot of nice people through that program and are continuing to work with them today. So, I think this, just kind of thinking through this with Randy, when he called and asked me to do this. I think that if there's one word that would kind of sum up, I think our bank in particular is just trust. It takes a lot of trust on the part of people to put their money in your institution and do that for 100 years and be willing to do that with confidence. And I think, just the history with the bank that people have looked for safety and security, which I think we all do when we're thinking about banking for the most part. But in particular, looking at this year, we've had the coronavirus that, still is a concern. There's still a lot of worry about whether we really will be able to manage it or not. I'm confident that we will, but still there are people that are still concerned about it. We've had a lot of social unrest and equality issues that have caused a lot of anxiety and consternation. The political climate, I don't want to go too deep with that, but there've been just lots of mixed messages with it, and some accurate and many not so accurate. And I think that builds a lot of distrust and concern. So I think providing consistency in what we do, consistency in our ownership, doing the right thing. One of the things that we, as a small bank, that you wrestle with is how do you stay competitive? And there are 4 different banking core software providers in our country. And we have saddled up with one called Jack Henry and Associates, which quite interestingly is out of Monett, Missouri. But Jack Henry has a history of being very proactive in its banking products and services. So it allows a bank in Louisburg, Kansas, to be able to compete with the big banks that offer online banking and mobile banking and mobile deposit capture and tap debit cards and et cetera, et cetera. So that's allowed us to play in an arena that we otherwise couldn't, because we just wouldn't have the wherewithal to be able to do that. In banking, again, people rely on you to take care of their finances, and so accuracy and reliability are huge. And I just to point that out for all of you, we process about 8,000 teller transactions a month at our 3 locations, and we will have on average 8 to 9 transactions that are off, and generally those are maybe a few pennies. So from a percentage standpoint, that's about 0.1% of all of our transactions are not processed accurately. And of course, once we determine something that is off, we fix that immediately. And again, I think our customers, not only expect that, but appreciate the fact that we are accurate and reliable in what we do. As far as the soundness of the bank, that's always been a hallmark for us. Bauer Financial Services, which is an independent banking watchdog, if you will, we've been rated a 5-star bank by them for 32 years consecutively. And if any of you watch or subscribe to the Kansas City Business Journal, for 6 years running, we have been either the number 2 or number 3 bank in the small bank group in Kansas City Metro. And there are about 30 banks that are in our category as far as size. Amazingly enough, there are 120 bank brands in Kansas City. And I know you all drive around as I do, and it's pretty much a bank on every corner. And there probably almost literally is. There's 687 branch banks or branch facilities in Kansas City, so there's lots of competition. Another area that I think has allowed us to be successful is accessibility and the longevity of our staff. So case in point with that, Anna Sprague is our senior vice president. We have 26 staff. Anna is the only senior vice president in our bank. She's been with us for 16 years. If you call our bank, you don't get an answering machine. You get Anna Sprague, 9 out of 10 times. And Anna has a responsibility for new accounts, customer service, and internal training. So she is very well versed in just banking in general, our bank, our services, our products. And so if someone has an issue, which so often for many of us, if we're calling our television, satellite provider or whatnot, very often we get somebody you can't understand. Maybe the line is breaking up. You have to push 2 for this and 3 for that. You call our bank, you get Anna. So I think people really do appreciate that kind of personal touch, and I think that that's helped us a lot. Our executive staff, there are 9 of us with officer status. Our average tenure here at the bank is 28 years. That ranges from 48 years with our president and down to 6 years as our newest vice president. But 5 out of the 9 of us have over 25 years of experience at First National Bank, not just in banking, but in this institution. And, when you're in a small town and you're going to the grocery store, you're going to church, you're going to a ball game, you're seeing friends and family, you're seeing same people, and they know who to talk to when there's an issue or a problem. Again, I think today that carries a lot of weight. I think our world has gotten more and more detached from the personal touch and has been driven so much to the electronic touch. And so, we have tried to carve out a balance between being high tech and high touch. And we talk about that a lot. We know we have to be viable from a technical standpoint, but we also know that we have to be, again, accessible and easy to get a hold of. And if there's a problem, somebody needs a loan and it needs to be done quickly, we can respond to that. We don't have to run a loan request, for instance, to a home office in New York. They run it into my office here in Louisburg. So we can move very, very quickly. And I think the end, kind of to sum it up, going back to this whole issue of trust, I think there's such a lack of that in our country. And I hate to say that, but I think it's a truth that we all would agree to. And I think we're all looking for things that we can trust and rely on. So, just the whole concept of honesty and integrity, for me, and I think for a lot of our customers, that's a huge piece of why people come and do business with us. And I think that can play out for any business. I just think those are hallmarks in life that sometimes get pushed to the side and shouldn't be. And so I think that they have, served us well for 100 years. So I don't know, Randy, do we leave it at that and do questions? Or?
Yeah, if you've got questions, type them in the chat and I'll open you up. You said something awesome there that I think applies to really every business in this environment when you talked about balancing out high tech and high touch. And when I think about banking, increasingly people, and especially young people, don't go to the bank anymore. They have direct deposit, they have debit cards, they don't meet Anna. So how do you create high touch in your business? Is that just being in the community? Is that how you create high touch?
Well, of course,
whenever somebody's opening an account, we don't offer account opening on a electronic basis, and we've really debated about that. But we felt that, again, because we're a community bank, we're not trying to market ourselves, throughout the state or throughout the country. We really are focusing, our market is right here, and our market is in Stillwell, and our market is in Prairie Village. So we've purposely not gone to an electronic opening account process because we wanted to be able to meet and get to know the people that are going to be banking with us. And we think that that kind of helps start that relationship. And you're right, the millennials, the young folks, I think, you know, my feeling is that over time, that generation is going to realize that maybe the high tech part, absent the high touch or the personal touch, isn't maybe all that it's cracked up to be. And they find that out, and I think we all experience this, when we have a problem. When something doesn't go right, we've got something, a deposit that isn't right, payment that isn't right, whatever it might be. Being able to actually see someone, talk to someone, call someone, and get that taken care of, I think is pretty important to a lot of people.
Marilyn, let's go to you.
Great. Marilyn, let's go to you.
Okay, I'm here. Just to let you know, there's a little bit of an echo. I don't know if you realize that or not. But first of all, I want to give Bob a lot of kudos because your bank has literally swam with the sharks, and you're still around. So I want to give you kudos on that, and also to tell you that I bank at a small bank. Unfortunately, I live in Lee Summit, but I bank at a small bank, and you know, it's great. I really appreciate it and appreciate the personal service. But what I wanted to ask you about was the way that the COVID-19 has affected small businesses. And I was just wondering if in your area, if what you see, if you think there's going to be a lot of problems with small businesses, and that's really going to be something that's going to very much affect the community.
You know, that's a really good question. You know, and Becky Bose, I know, is on this call as well, and she's head of our Chamber of Commerce. You know, my you know, feeling is that Louisburg has been lightly touched by the virus. I'm not aware of very many businesses that have been closed as a result of it. Certainly, if you go into the metropolitan area, you can see a lot of businesses that have. But our restaurants are open, and I think for the most part, we've been, you know, spared. Miami County as a whole, if you look at what's happened in the state, we've not had a lot of breakouts with the virus, so that's been beneficial as well. So so far, we've been able to, you know, get along pretty well and without a lot of problems.
Let's go to Mike Meyer.
Hey, I loved the history of today. That was really very, very interesting to hear all the way back. And I was wondering if Kansas City being selected as one of the Federal Reserve cities, when it had an effect or impacted the bank, or was that a boom to the region or anything like that? Just kind of a historical question.
Yeah, so Mike, repeat that again. I wasn't sure I got everything that you said at the beginning.
So I just was wondering if, first of all, I said I really appreciated the history of kind of what you talked about today. It was extremely interesting. And I wondered if Kansas City being selected as one of the Federal Reserve cities had any impact on banking in the area historically, and what did that mean to our region?
Yeah, really good question. And again, kind of one of those things that most of the public wouldn't really have an awareness of or, you know, understand kind of the impact. But having the Federal Reserve Bank in Kansas City is huge for our area. And the Kansas City Fed has satellite offices in Omaha and then also in Oklahoma City. So those are tied to the Kansas City Fed. And Esther George is the current president of that. And she's been one of the few in the FOMC, which is the you know, the body that kind of helps the Fed as a whole set interest rates across the country. She's probably probably been one of the most conservative Fed presidents to sit on that board. And it's hard to kind of go into all the particulars of how that impacts our local area, but it does, because all of the banks feed off of the Fed. We get our coin, our currency from the Fed. We can borrow from the Fed if we have strong loan demand. We need access to funds, then we can do that. So today, again, just because of what's happened with electronics and digitizing everything, it's probably not as significant as it was in the beginning. But if you go back to the early parts of kind of the establishing Kansas as a state and the Midwest, having the Kansas City Fed there was significant, because they did provide a lot of direct support to small towns like ours to get going and get started as a financial institution. So yeah, and if you ever have a chance, again, if you're looking for something to do on a weekday, if you have time, you can go to the Kansas City Fed. They have an unbelievable museum of their own, going back to the Al Capone days. His submachine gun is in the lobby, and you can actually watch the safe or the vault system, and I couldn't tell you how many millions of dollars are in that vault, but it's all driven by robots. There are no people in this vault. It's all robot driven. And so when our bank orders a pallet of $1 bills or whatever we may be getting, and gets in an elevator, goes up 2 floors, drives, gets a pallet of that, brings it back down, it gets loaded into a truck and is sent on its way. So it's really kind of a fascinating thing to see if you have time to go see that.
Let's go to Joel.
Hi, Bob. Hey, thanks so much for what First National Bank and you have done for the Louisburg community over the years, for sure. My question for you would be, what has the role been for your bank in the farming industry? There's been lots of up and downs over the years for farmers in general. So how have you kind of been what has your role been through those hard times and up and downs for a farming community?
Okay, yeah, I get it. Good question. If you know our area, we are rural based, and so back in the day, farming was a huge part of our economy here, and the bank was born really by farmers. They sensed a need for having capital available and an ability to do banking functions. So those are the guys that actually started our bank. So we have a heritage in agriculture, quite frankly. You roll to today, our area has changed pretty dramatically, and a kind of unique piece of our economy is sod farming, and that happens in northern Miami County and southern Johnson County, and both of those have been a big part of what's happened in our area, and we have great customers that are sod farmers. But I think the fact that you can be a community bank, so if you're a farmer here in Lewisburg and you want to develop a banking relationship and you think, well, I'm going to reach out to somebody and I'm just going to take Bank of America because it's a big bank, everybody knows them. And to try to start a relationship and a banking relationship, one that you can count on for a course of time, that's going to be a difficult path to take. I don't want to pass judgment on Bank of America. They are a huge bank and provide a lot for a lot of people. But a farmer especially, I think those folks want to have a relationship. And so being able to come to Lewisburg and meet with myself or George Carnese or any of our folks and start that process, that's what's happened over the course of the years. And so we've always had a very close relationship with the farming community here. And we know these people. And, you know, banking is so much dollars and cents, facts and figures, but it's really a whole lot more in the relationship and knowing people. Character, collateral for a loan is an important part of the puzzle. But if you don't have good character, the best collateral in the world isn't going to make for a good loan. And so, that's an extraordinarily important part of that. And, one of the things, we've gone for 5 years in our bank, and we have had 2 loans go bad. We have 450 loans that are non-PPP loans. And over the last 5 years, we've had 2 loans that have defaulted. Both of them combined are less than $10,000. We haven't repossessed a farm or repossessed a home or a car in probably 15 or 20 years. And so what that is a combination of, I think, our bank using good judgment and being prudent in the decisions that we've made. But it also says as much to me about the quality of the people that live area. I think the Midwest is a great, tuning in from somewhere in the Midwest, but I'm so grateful that I live here, raised my family here, I work here. I just think it's a great place to be because I think of the quality of the people. For us to have 450 loans, to not have 1 loan go bad or 2 loans in the last 5 years says a ton about the honesty and integrity and the work ethic and the responsibility that people have in this area. And so if you were going to have a bank, where else would you want to be? I mean, this is a great place to be running a bank because of the people that are here. And the farming community, if there's any better industry, quite frankly, that's more honest and has more integrity, I can't think of any, that would, be above the farming community.
Let's go to Mary.
Good morning, Bob. And it's really great to hear that personal service is still a hallmark of your bank. So with that being said, my question is, how has the digital age impacted the services that you offer? And are you still considered a full service bank?
Yeah, good question. And, we really strive to be. And the banking industry and just what's happening with access to banking services is a moving target and is moving as fast as anyone can imagine. Mobile banking, just to give you a perspective, mobile banking doubled it from 2017 to 2019 across our country, not just our bank, but across the country. It's now the #1 point of access for banking, for financial access. And so if you don't have a mobile presence, you are probably not going to be in business. We've had mobile banking for many years, and we introduced mobile deposit capture a number of years ago, which I'm going to guess a number of you probably used that. My wife uses it and loves it. So she doesn't have to come to the bank. She can just take a picture of her check and it gets deposited and she's on her way. So absolutely, there's got to be a blend and a balance of the technology that we all, want to use and really, quite frankly, have to use. I mean, it's the interface electronically. We're doing it this morning. And the banking world is no different. So, it's of paramount importance that a small bank like ours have the ability from a technology standpoint to be able to operate. And again, that kind of goes back to our association with Jack Henry and Associates and being able to offer those abilities but yet then carry with that I think the personal side of it and being able to have relationships with people. And you know, the volume and velocity of change that is happening in our world as compared to, so if you take the last 10 years and compare that to the 90 years ahead of that, I'm going to guess that the volume and velocity of change in that 10 years is more than what happened in the previous 90 in lots of ways, and certainly in these environments. But we're all human, and we all have needs from a human standpoint. And so this marriage between, you know, being with somebody, talking with somebody, experiencing somebody, and then living in this digital world, and that you blend that into banking, that's really the art of the deal. And so it's why we have decided to stay very close in our area. We're not going to Nebraska, and we're not going to Manhattan, Kansas. We're in Louisburg, we're in Stillwell, and we're in Prairie Village. And we want to be as good as we can be in those three areas. And we want to be able to offer the services that people need. And we have 100 years to suggest that maybe that's worked pretty well.
Thank you, Bob. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to Kurt.
Hey, Randy, again, thanks for getting us together. Randy and Bob, I appreciate your perspective and insight. And it's got to be a crazy world with the pandemic and such cheap money and so forth. But and again, I'm not a banking expert, so I'm just a dude that tries to help some small businesses. I saw the Fed came out very early on with a facility, and I think it was some sort of Main Street facility where they were offering loans through banks in which the Fed would actually buy 95% of that loan. And it was, I want to say 40 basis points above it. But my take is, or my perception is, it was not well received. It didn't get much play or much traction. Some bankers I've spoken with said that's because it was really just a play by the Fed to prop up and portray strength and stability, but there was just too much red tape behind it to execute. I'm curious, maybe I haven't described the facility correctly, but holy smokes, the Fed isn't in the loan business, but they would buy 95% of a loan. What happened? Why didn't that get much traction?
Good question, and you kind of hit, unfortunately, well, to put it in perspective. So, SBA with the PPP program, that thing was launched in a matter of weeks, and more loans were made in the course of 2 or 3 weeks by the SBA, through the SBA, than were done through the SBA for the previous 25 years. So now the only way that happened was via the SBA, and not to disparage the federal government, but you can only imagine trying to put something into play as big as the PPP program in the matter of weeks. There were some rough edges, let's say, and so all of us that chose to participate in that had to work through a lot of those rough edges. And I can tell you, we spent hours on the phone with email trying to figure out how does this work? Can we do this? Do we do this? Can't you do this? Whatever. So the Main Street program is kind of an extension of that, coming through the Federal Reserve. But it's not without a lot of time and effort and detail. And I think that there's probably a little bit of exhaustion on the part of the banks, a part of this, I think, just because of what we've experienced with the PPP program. So to gear up your staff to now take on another program is because we're still working through PPP. And one of the things that I think that a lot of people don't understand is the federal government hasn't lent anybody a dime. None of the money that was given out in PPP loans came from the federal government. All of those dollars came from local banks or banks in general. So we lent 8.6 million. It wasn't the federal government's money. That money is still out. We've not had one of our loans pay off, either be forgiven by the federal government or being paid by our borrowers. We're now in the phase of going through the forgiveness process. And so there are applications that have to be completed and submitted to the bank. So we're still in the midst of the PPP program, and will be, I'm sure, for months to go. So to take on another program has been, I'm sure, a little bit daunting for a lot of banks. But be that as it may, if there's a need, the federal government, I think, really genuinely is trying to do all it can to help prop up and help small business. And so there are those facilities. You've got the Main Street program, you've got SBA programs that are available aside from the PPP program. And I think now that the election is done, I think probably Congress will be able to move forward pretty quickly again with another stimulus package. And I think there's going to be another regeneration of the PPP program from that. So I think there's going to be inexpensive dollars available again to small business pretty quickly through PPP.
Let's go to
Thank you.
Steve.
That helps me. That helps, and I appreciate your response. And thanks for you and all your bank did for all those small businesses. That's
Sure.
I think all of us on this call, or a lot of us at least, would say that's the heart of the economy. And so, thank you very much.
You bet. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks.
Steve, you there?
I'm here. Randy and Bob, thanks for another great program. Bob, my question goes to the growth of the national debt, sort of the elephant in the room here. Everyone is very much aware of that size of that debt and the rapid growth that we've experienced. What's your perception on how that'll roll out, affecting individuals and businesses?
Boy, if I have the answer to that, or if anyone does, they could probably become president. That is, you're right. It is for me, it's a big elephant in the room. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that issue. Again, being in a banking situation, all of you having home budgets and business budgets, you know that, for instance, we have a young kid come into our bank, opens up an account, and I very often will go over and say, okay, Jimmy or Sally or whatever your name is, if you put $10 in the bank and you write a check for $15, what's going to happen? And they just kind of look at me like, what are you talking about? Well, you only put 10 in, you're going to write a check for 15, what's going to happen? And you say, well, I don't have $15. And that's right. But if you spent 15, now you got a problem. Not only have you overdrawn your account $5, but you're going to get hit with a service charge. And so now you're going to probably be $30 overdrawn and not just $5 overdrawn. And so I use that to illustrate that that's kind of what's happening in our country and what's happening with our deficit. Because, when we spend dollars we don't really have, then we're having to pay interest on those dollars. And then that just also contributes to the deficit. So I don't know. It's a worry for me, for my grandkids, because I do think at some point there's going to have to be a day of reckoning. One of two things I think has to happen. We either have to find a way to live within our means, as we all do in our homes and our businesses, and begin to pay that debt back, which means that we probably can't continue to spend money on appropriated areas of our country with dollars that we don't have. So I think either way, it's going to be a difficult path at some point, and maybe get real difficult at some point, because all of the social services that we fund to kind of keep us going. And, you know, the PPP program is a good example of that. With the stimulus packages, we've just have written checks, federal government's written checks with money we don't have. And so how that gets paid back,
Bob,
I'm not sure how that kind of plays out.
Bob, I get that. I get that. Let me ask this for a different kind of response. What is your bank doing in terms of planning for the potential impact from that debt having to be addressed? What is your strategic plan? What are you doing within your business to prepare?
Well, we don't have a plan. I mean, and I don't say that, callously or recklessly. The country has been dealing with a deficit for decades, and we've been able to manage it. It's kind of like the frog that you put in the pot and you turn the burner on, and all of a sudden the water's boiling and it's too late to get out. And the frog never realized it because it just was a slow burn. I really think that's in large part what's going to happen for all of us. It's this, and so there really isn't any sense of urgency. So, strategically for us to try to be building a game plan to deal with that, I guess my best response to that is, we've got $18 million in capital. That's the bank's ownership's money that's vested in this institution. And it's the first dollars that are at risk. And that's true for any bank. So if a bank, if a loan goes bad, it's the bank's money that gets spent to cover that loan. It's not our depositors' money. So we are building a war chest and have for years. And we're actually probably more highly capitalized than most bankers would suggest. Because we're probably not putting our dollars at work as well as maybe we could. But again, our ownership is the tortoise, not the hare. And so I guess in that respect, we're kind of building for the future and an economy that it may not be quite as good as what we've experienced in the last 10 or 20 years here. And I don't want to predict that, this gloom and doom is going to happen anytime soon. But I do think over the course of time, there's going to have to be some reconciliation of where we're at as a country.
Thank you.
I don't know whether that helps or not. But.
Nick's got a great question about the bigs buying the littles. And I hope he's right. Maybe that pendulum will swing. Go ahead, Nick.
Hey, Bob, I do appreciate the history as well as the values that you and your bank and your fellow brother managers and sister managers sort of espouse to the rest of the clientele. I grew up in Northwest around Spokane area. We got a large family farm stand for generations, and we had a great relationship with people at the bank. Was bought out, and as in my statement is, they kept the tellers because the tellers are who you deal with, obviously face to face, but the relationship with the management changed. It was about risk. It wasn't about trust. And bought my business this year. It was very impersonal with the bank, and I knew I grew up in a bubble. I mean, my town of 1,000 people, is 30 miles away from any large city. Do you see any resurgence back to where our population is going to trusting small businesses? I mean, we've gone away from that with mom and pop shops like Amazon now has taken over. We've gone away from the large Walmart, small towns being bought out by Walmarts. The banks have headed that direction as well, but it's what we miss, sort of the essential culture of, we always talk about small business. Everybody talks about small business. Banks are small businesses that I would like to see. What do you see in your crystal ball about that type of future to regain not only people's trust, but the small business growth in the nation?
Wow. Good question. I don't know that I've got a really good answer for you. I do kind of think that, I talked about kind of the volume and velocity of change that's been going on in our country in recent years. And I think that what we may see, and I hope we see, quite frankly, is that we find out that maybe fast and furious isn't the best way to live as a society. And that maybe we'll all begin to realize that things that are more stable and more lasting are more important. And so the big box stores, the Amazons, we're doing everything. We don't go to the store anymore to buy something, or a lot of us don't. We just go online, order it. But I don't know. It's a psychology issue, I think, as much as it is a commerce issue in our world. And I can only speak for myself. I appreciate being able to call up Art Carnes here in Louisburg if my hot water heater has gone out. And I know Art, and I can trust Art, and he'll come and he'll take care of my hot water heater. If you live in the, and again, I don't know where all you all live, and so I don't want to certainly offend anybody. But my point is that, if you don't have those kinds of relationships, then there's a loss there. There's an inability, I think, to get things done sometimes and get them done satisfactorily. And so I just wonder if maybe as a society, people are not going to start realizing that small business, maybe that comes back because people want those relationships. And the guy that, the local plumber, instead of it being a franchise-owned plumbing company, it's just a local plumber, because that guy's probably going to do things that the corporate outfit wouldn't do. I don't know. For us, our economy, fortunately, in Louisburg and southern Johnson County, where we're located at, has afforded us a lot of protection, because there are a lot of small businesses. We don't have a Boeing plant. We don't have a Ford Motor plant. So we don't have one industry that drives us. We're very diverse. And that's hugely beneficial, I think, to everyone that's here, because you don't have to go to Wichita, and if you know anybody from that area, what they've experienced with the airline industry, or the air industry, plane industry, that's affected their economy dramatically. And we're not built that way here, and that's a good thing. And I think that having lots of different businesses provides lots of diversity and provides lots of protection. So where it all heads from here, who knows? I mean, it's been an interesting ride for sure for all of us in the last 10 years, I think.
One of the things Drew and I have talked about, I know Drew's still hanging there, but he's also got another call going, but we've talked about this with different businesses, is what's the value of a business finding the right size bank to be their partner?
That is really a good question. And it kind of goes back to, my comments about, and I'm just going to use Bank of America. Every bank has a lending limit. We're 162 million in assets and 18 million in capital. So there's a formula that we look at pretty often. So the maximum size loan that we can make is about $3 million. Well, right out of the gate, there are a lot of businesses in our country that First National Bank couldn't help and wouldn't help. So we really are geared for that small business homeowner relationship. And so if you're Amazon, and of course now they have more money than the rest of the world does probably, but if you're a big business, you're going to go to a money center bank. And so the Wells Fargos of the world, the Bank of Americas of the world, come into play, and for good reason, because they have the financial wherewithal and the size that they can work with a company that needs, you know, maybe not millions, but billions of dollars to operate. That's not First National Bank. That's not us. That's not why we're here, and really not our footprint. So there really is a marriage of customer to a financial institution, and there really isn't one size fits all. You know, it just depends on who you are, what you are, and really your size that kind of dictates who's going to be a good fit for you.
Well, this has been great. Congratulations on the 100 years. That's awesome.
Thanks. Well, thanks
Yeah,
for the
thanks. Well,
opportunity
thanks
to-
for the opportunity to tell the story, because like I said, we've had an entire year of things planned. We were going to have a chamber after hours get together, and we may still try to do that in our 101st birthday. So we'll see if maybe next year we can pull that off. But we had a lot of things planned, and so this at least gave me an opportunity to tell a few people about our story, because I think it really is kind of a pretty neat story to tell. It's fun to be able to tell it.
We'll do another 100, and hopefully you're here for a bunch of that next 100.
Well,
Yeah. Well, maybe a few more years. I'm enjoying myself.
Awesome. Well, it's good to see everyone. Hope all of you have a great weekend, and we will do this again next Thursday.
thanks.
Thanks, Manny.